So, Steve, we ended last week's conversation all about this idea of polytherapy, which was really something I've never heard before. It's a bit of a genius move on your end, where you're like, look, very often we try to treat mental disorders with this thing called monotherapy, which I'm not necessarily a language expert, means one type of therapy. Polytherapy meaning many different types. And you kind of started to lay out how there's not just one way to treat anxiety. There's a whole kind of arsenal of weapons you can use, or in more mental health podcast terms, there's a whole range of tools in your tool belt that you can deploy to, ease the suffering and experience, in some cases, full recovery from some of these disorders. So talk to me about drugs. Like, as we move into some of the treatments and the cures and the preventative strategies, I think it's just essential that we cover this. Like, what are some of the major medications used to treat anxiety? Give us your opinion on it. What are the pros? What are the cons? What are each of them doing? Because there seems to be quite a lot. And I have friends who are taking drugs that I know to be antidepressants for their anxiety. So I'm like, wait, what's happening here?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So is it okay if I do a little pivot here, Hugh? I promise I'm going to answer your question. But before I answer it, I want to say just one really important thing. And that is, all of us want the magic bullet, the magic pill, for anxiety, or for that matter, for any other psychological disorder. Because why? We grow up with the magic bullet, right? We have a strep throat, we have an ear infection, we find the right antibiotic, and like, boom, it's cured. There's so many different medical conditions where if we find the right drug, it's a single drug or a single intervention, and boom, it's a magic bullet and we're better. And it turns out, though, that for every form of mental illness that we really care about, that expectation of a magic bullet, of the single intervention that's going to give us complete and lasting cure, it does not exist. And I was really banging my head against the wall one day several years ago thinking about this whole paradox. And I stumbled across a colleague who was writing about Alzheimer's disease. And he was saying, hey, guess what? In the Alzheimer's research, we're looking for the magic bullet. And he's like, I don't know why we're looking for the magic bullet, the monotherapy, single pill, when like we just have this example in everybody's living memory at the time of AIDS, the AIDS crisis, and looking for the magic drug that's going to cure people of HIV infection. And within 10 years after AIDS had been discovered, we had 3 different drugs for AIDS, and they all sucked. They were all minimally effective. They could give some reduction in viral load. They would have a small subset of patients that would actually have a cure, but it was very small. And they all came at the virus, the HIV virus, from different angles. And he's like, what changed the whole game was when researchers were finally like, hey, what if instead of monotherapy, we had polytherapy? What if we come at this really difficult medical problem from 3 different angles simultaneously? And from that emerged the legendary, the famous AIDS cocktail, the HIV cocktail. 3 different drugs that now have transformed a death sentence disease into something that we can now give people usually a completely normal life and a full life expectancy.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. And so I started thinking about that with respect to depression. I was like, yeah, we do that too. We're looking for the magic bullet. It does not exist. But if we're willing to pivot to doing all the things, to thinking about how can we come at this treacherous illness from all of these different angles, just like we do knocking out HIV, that can cure it. What if we come at clinical anxiety from lots of different angles? We have so much greater chance of success.
But this makes a lot of sense to me because, like, as you laid out in the last episode, anxiety is not caused by just one thing. It's not like you can like go into a little piece of your brain and say, yes, this little tiny nerve here, this is what gives you anxiety. It's like, no. It's your genes, it's your hormones, it's your nervous system. You've also got then the confounding factor of like, it's also your thought life. It's also what's going on inside your mental space. And all these things kind of come together and layer on top of each other and maybe stack up to the point where it's like, if with enough of all those things, you're going to have a diagnosable state of anxiety. So,
absolutely,
polytherapy in that context makes perfect sense.
I think so, yeah. And also, just to layer the complexity, there are so many different parts of the brain that all play different roles, right? We talked about the amygdala as kind of ground zero for our fear response. We talked about the cingulate cortex, which gives us that feeling that something's wrong, that error detection. We talked about the prefrontal cortex, which gives us that higher order conscious interpretation of like, is there threat? Do I have control? Can I predict? Am I going to ruminate? Am I going to brood? And so many more regions of the brain as well. So if you think about just how deeply complex anxiety really is, it makes perfect sense that if somebody has really pathological anxiety, they're suffering, it's interfering with their function, it's just not very reasonable to expect that we're going to find the magic bullet for them. But if we're willing to employ 5 or 6 things that all come at anxiety from different angles, then our odds of success are dramatically higher.
So what are the major drugs that people are using, that people are prescribing, and what are each of them doing in this kind of poly world that we've entered into, the multiverse of anxiety?
Yeah, great question. Okay, so there are a lot of, as you mentioned, a lot of different antidepressants. By the way, irony alert. Antidepressants are way more effective on average for anxiety than they are for depression.
What the heck,
It is
man?
freaking crazy. If you look at the effect size, like in other words, how big of a reduction do you get in anxiety versus a control placebo, a medically inert placebo pill, way bigger for anxiety on average than for depression. So, but they were developed and marketed first for depression. They do have some effect, which we'll get to, for depression. But I mean, they're pretty decent at blunting the intensity of emotion, turning down the dial on our emotions. Now, for some people, that is a blessing. For some people, by giving this drug, which induces a lot of different changes in circuitry that uses serotonin, sometimes circuitry that uses noradrenaline, which is chemically related to adrenaline, you change the way the brain perceives the world, you change the way the brain reacts to the world, and you can tamp down the level of emotional arousal. Some of us, and I'm in this category, have really twitchy amygdalas. Can I say that? I got a twitchy amygdala. You're supposed to laugh at that, Hugh.
I was too busy imagining it as like part of our merch, like a t-shirt that says I have a twitchy amygdala. It can be like a shorthand for like, I am on the anxiety spectrum.
Also, if we ever form a band, it's got to be...
Oh, the twitchy amygdalas, bro.
Yeah. All right. So I've got a twitchy amygdala, which means I'm genetically hardwired to have intense emotion. But if I can turn down that intensity, now how have I turned it down? I've done a lot of different things we'll talk about. Am I taking an antidepressant? No. But if I did take an antidepressant, there's a pretty good chance that it would also turn down that intensity. And that could be beneficial as long as I get it calibrated properly. In other words, I want it somewhat less intense, but I don't want it to drop it too much because I don't want to be emotionally numb. And one of the most common things you'll hear people say on antidepressants is they just feel kind of numb to everything. It's like, I don't get like super excited about anything anymore. I don't feel quite as passionate about my romantic partner. It's awesome to not be in as much emotional pain of sadness or anxiety or anger. But I'm kind of numb. That's by the way, a sign that we're getting too much of a good thing. And that would be a sign to talk to your prescribing physician or healthcare provider and say, maybe we could back off the dose. Maybe we could do some experimenting with a different drug or something, because I don't want to go through life numb, right? None of us wants to be numb, or at least we wouldn't if we were really thinking about how can I have my best possible life. Okay. Now, the other thing antidepressants tend to do is they turn down that error detection, the cingulate cortex that we talked about, that feeling of like something is wrong. By the way, error detection is most easily noticed in those of us who are perfectionists. Perfectionists. Why? Well, if you're a perfectionist, you've got that sensation like, oh, it's not good enough. Something's wrong, right? It's like, oh, I can always keep tweaking. I can do something to make it better. If you take a drug like an antidepressant that turns down your cingulate function, then you will become less perfectionistic. You'll become better able to just kind of let go and not be consumed with worry about like, oh, things don't feel right. What could go wrong? Antidepressants also put the brakes on the brain's overall stress response circuitry, and that governs our hormonal responses that release adrenaline, that release cortisol and other stress hormones. So you can see where they could be enormously helpful for anxiety for some people. They usually do not fully cure GAD. And, they also have the other disadvantage of lots of side effects, which we're not going to talk about today, but we should talk about sometime, as well as the disadvantage of tolerance effects. And what I mean by that is if we throw the same chemical at the brain every day, the brain is going to get used to it. The brain is going to adapt. The brain is going to push back. And so what we tend to find with antidepressants is after a year, 2 years, 3 years, the person does not get the same effect from the drug that they initially got.
So let's talk about the actual drugs, the official drugs then, the anti-anxiety medications. Like, what do they do? So they're obviously trying to come at this from a different angle than the antidepressants.
Yeah, absolutely. So by far the most widely used class of anxiety meds, and in fact, I'm going to take it further. The most widely prescribed class of all psychiatric meds are anxiety meds called benzodiazepines. And for short, we just call them benzos, and they're very, very famous drugs like Xanax.
I've heard Eminem rap about benzos. That's like how I know about them.
Also Vicodin, probably. But yeah, recently Billie Eilish released a song, I say recently, a few years ago, a song called Xanny, which could be a street name for Xanax, or sometimes the kids here call it bars because it's shaped like a little bar. There are 90 million prescriptions of benzodiazepines written in the US every year. 90 million in a country of 330 million. That's kind of alarming, maybe, given that, again,
it's crazy.
Given that they are massive party drugs. They are hugely addictive. And again, we could have a whole episode on this. Maybe we should. I don't want to take the deep dive on it right now, other than to say these drugs are really, really, really popular with patients, maybe for obvious reasons, because people can get high on them. But more importantly, and this is in all seriousness, they are probably among the most powerful short-acting meds that we have. And so if you're a doctor, if you're a prescriber, and you give somebody an antidepressant, here in the States, we call them drug names like Lexapro or Celexa or Zoloft or Luvox or Prozac, right? I mean, any of those names ring a bell, Hugh?
Not really. I think that we just say the actual drug name rather than any sort of brand name over here.
Dude, are you going to make me be all like fluoxetine, citalopram, escitalopram?
Dude, I've heard of all of them. Like that's the penny drop.
Venlafaxine.
We have public health care. Let's not get into that, but that's the difference is you guys are selling brand names and we're just taking drugs.
Do you have Xanny or do you call it diazepam, clonazepam?
We call it diazepam, literally.
Oh, God. All right, fine. Well, I'm going to call it Xanny, okay? Xanax. Xanax is the most widely prescribed benzo in
It's
the
like
US.
the difference between a Kleenex and a tissue.
Oh, a tissue. Yeah, all right, fine. Totally.
So what does benzodiazepine actually do for anxiety? Like, what's the impact?
Benzos, they turn down, so they target a really important molecular brain chemical target in the brain called GABA. And I mentioned it before in episode 1 or part 1, gamma aminobutyric acid, GABA for short. And that is it's ubiquitous. It's widespread throughout the cortex. It is like the major regulatory braking system in the cortex. And benzos hit that braking system really hard. And they're basically turning down the rate of firing, the rate of activity in like massive percentages of our brain circuits all the way throughout the brain. They're just turning everything down. So it has a sedating effect. It has an anti-anxiety effect. It has a stress relief effect, but it also makes people slower mentally, right? So people on benzos often get kind of mentally sluggish. Their memory suffers. They're just the speed of their speech production. It's like they're kind of in slow motion. It's not that dissimilar from the response that a lot of people get to alcohol. Guess what? Alcohol also targets GABA. Very similar kinds of effects in the brain. That should tell us something about like how careful we need to be. And so the only part of the brain, well, the only major part of the brain that actually speeds up on benzos is the reward circuits. And that's a whole complicated story that we could talk about how they have this indirect speeding up effect there. But basically, they're just turning everything else down.
So, I mean, we have quite a nice little structural play that we can do here where, so you said antidepressants are kind of longer term. You said things like benzodiazepines are kind of like shorter term, and that's why people favor them. And I think like looking at our list here of different types of treatments and preventative measures for anxiety, there are kind of these two sections. There's like things we can do right now, this very second, like while listening to this podcast or just after we finish listening, like that, like almost like break glass in case of emergency. This is like the emergency bag that you pull out of your mental health toolkit whenever you're just having one of those days, your anxiety level's sky high, you're really, really feeling it, and you just need that really short-term relief to get you through the day or the presentation or the class or the family dinner or whatever it is. Then there's kind of like the long game, which you and I are big fans of. It's like there's those preventative strategies. There's those lifestyle changes, those habits that we can implement to not only kind of walk us through a journey to recovery, but potentially to a place where we're completely managing some of these mental disorders as well. So you choose your own adventure. What do you want to do? Short term or long term?
Oh, hey, we were just talking about benzos, which are the ultimate break glass. By the way, I'm not opposed to somebody like that. You know, they've got a horrible fear of flying. They got to fly across the country to get to a funeral. They don't have time to do the psychotherapy involved.
I don't have time for a 20 session hypnosis course. Like, just give it to me.
Give me the damn lorazepam or whatever. You know, and I'm fine with that. That's a really elegant use of that medication class. But we need other tools, right? That are kind of like that. Break glass in case of emergency. My own go-to, my number one, if I'm sitting in a meeting, with colleagues or the dean or, some stressful meeting where the stakes are high and people are not always being super polite and friendly, and there's conflict. I love diaphragmatic breathing.
Oh, I was really hoping you were going to say that because I had something like that just came to me as you were speaking. Yeah. It was like, this is like your t-shirt or this is your like Michael Jordan like PSA announcement. You're like, kids, you got to switch your diazepam for diaphragmatic breathing.
Yeah, and that, boy, that is super catchy. I'm sure it's good. That's going to take over the memosphere for sure. It's like, you know what? If mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, can take over the memosphere. Maybe maybe there's hope for us.
Come on, we'll have a Reddit meme page. Oh
God, okay, so diaphragmatic breathing. You and I have talked about this before a little bit. So the diaphragm is just this really big, smooth muscle, sits at the bottom of the lungs, and when it contracts and expands, that's basically is the pump that drives the air in and out of our lungs. Problem is that we can also get some inhalation, exhalation. We can get air in and out a little bit just by doing our chest muscles instead. So a lot of people, when they're nervous and tense, the abdomen tightens up, the diaphragm tightens up, and all their breathing is like shallow and rapid, and it's coming from the chest. So if you watch people, this is a really cool trick. Try this at home, boys and girls. Watch people while they're breathing and notice, is their chest moving or is their belly moving?
Oh, this is some good Sherlock Holmes stuff. I enjoy this.
Start by watching babies. Start by watching toddlers, because toddlers have no shred of self-consciousness. Thank God. It's one of the things we love about them. They're just letting it all hang out. And their belly, they're not ashamed or afraid to let their belly pooch in and out while they're breathing. And it's beautiful. It's perfect. That is textbook diaphragmatic breathing. And it's way more efficient. And it has the added bonus. When you're breathing from the diaphragm, your tummy is pooching out on every inhale, and it's sucking in a little bit on every inhale. It literally turns down activity in your body's stress response circuits, the part of the nervous system that runs on adrenaline and a chemical cousin called noradrenaline. It slams the brakes. So there's a part of that automatic nervous system, the autopilot nervous system. Just, pro tip for kids at home, it's called the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's just a fancy way of saying it's the part of the nervous system that runs alongside that adrenaline one, and it puts the brakes on. And diaphragmatic breathing hacks right into that part of the nervous system. There's a main broadband connection called the vagus nerve. Have you ever heard of that, Hugh? The vagus nerve? Not like Las Vegas, but VAGUS.
Yeah, but it kind of like weird context where I'm like, can I trust these people, or are they trying to sell me like some sort of snake oil?
Oh, like vagus nerve stimulation.
I don't know. Yeah, all this sort of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of woo-woo, a lot of snake oil charlatanism around it. But vagus nerve is a thing that exists, and if we can stimulate it, then it really will immediately lower our level of anxiety. And our anxious.
So you do this in meetings, so it's not like a big massive like Wim Hof loud breathing exercise. No, you can kind of do it sneaky, yeah.
Oh yeah, and by the way, every trained singer has been trained to do diaphragmatic breathing. Why? Because singing requires extraordinary breath control, and the only way you can possibly be a good singer is if you are doing diaphragmatic breathing while you're singing. Ditto for yoga, which is all about breath control, all about getting in tune with the body and allowing the body to, basically heal itself in many different, or at least setting the stage for that. Part of that means enhancing vagus nerve activity, vagal tone, which is to say the braking system for our stress response. Diaphragmatic breathing is the single most effective hack that I have. We'll put a link to a little 6-minute YouTube training thing in the show notes. Which
I was going to say, whenever you brought up the yoga, I was like, yes, we can totally use your daughter's video again. Yeah, we used it in episode 2 whenever we talked about diaphragmatic breathing, and it's super good. It's straight to the point, no fuss. You learn how to do it. It's very simple, and it's a nice thing to bookmark if you wanted to kind of go along with the guided breath work there. It's something you can just pull up at any time, like on your computer, and just go ahead and do it.
Absolutely. Yeah. The other big downside of non-diaphragmatic, or, that sort of anxious, rapid, shallow breathing, is it actually causes the acidity level, the pH of blood, to go into the acid zone. It changes the acidity of our blood, which bizarrely, it's been discovered that the amygdala and some other stress circuits in the brain have acidity or pH receptors. They have acid sensing ion channels that are designed to cause us to go into fight or flight mode when our blood turns acidic. And so diaphragmatic breathing actually kind of buffers us against that. It actually can indirectly turn down amygdala activity by lowering the acidity level of our blood. It's wild.
So really, this should be our first point of call in the break glass in case of emergency. It's literally it's 5 minutes. Is that going to do it?
More than enough.
Yeah? Okay.
I would say I start to feel the effects. And this, it might be partly placebo. I will acknowledge that.
Take it. Hey.
I'll take it, man.
Let's do an episode on the placebo sometime, because the placebo is great if it's used well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's highly underrated. I would say within 4 or 5 diaphragmatic breaths, I can feel my blood pressure dropping, my heart rate dropping. I can feel a return of some semblance of equilibrium. And 5 minutes, man, I am so zen. It's like, I'm ready to start levitating after.
So let's go there, because me, I'm a big fan of habit stacking. So again, I've just broken the glass. I'm doing my breathing. This feels very opportune for a little bit of meditation or some sort of mindfulness. So
love it. Yeah.
Give it to us. How can we kind of stack this? So I'm feeling super anxious. I'm 1 minute into my diaphragmatic breathing. It brings me down. My heart rate is coming down. My amygdala is firing less. Maybe now I have the capacity to do something else. What would that be?
All right, let's take a step back and just think about, mindfulness is very buzzy. It's everywhere. And I think a lot of people hear the term, it's jargony. They don't know exactly what's being referenced. So mindfulness really is just all about being fully present in the moment without judgment, just being right here, right now. Every past moment that we've ever experienced is gone forever, which is kind of stark, but it's real, right? It's true. Everything we've ever experienced is gone. We'll never have those moments back. Every future moment that we ever hope to experience is not here yet. And we're not promised those moments. We hope we'll have them. I trust that I will, but I don't know. All I have is right here, right now. And if I want to live my best life, I need to learn how to really be fully present right here, right now, wide awake, and without judgment, just to experience it as it is in all of its beauty, in all of its magic. That's mindfulness. That's it.
I didn't know you were so zen, bro.
Well, you know, I'm a man of mystery. Many.
Let me ask you this: did you ever watch the movie with your kids? I feel like you would have loved it. If it just depends how old your kids were, if it hit you right time wise. Jack Black's Kung Fu Panda.
You know what? I never had to sit through that.
Oh man! So there's this moment like halfway through the first movie where he meets this like super zen like I think it's a turtle or something like a turtle. I mean, it makes sense now I said out loud. It has to be a turtle. What else could it be? And he's this like wise sage, and he's got this incredible quote where he's something like, "Yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift, and that's why it's called the present." And for me,
oh man,
every time I think about mindfulness, I'm like, dude, Kung Fu Panda turtle, come at me, bro.
That is awesome. I got to have that like tattooed on my forearm or something. That's amazing. Okay, so mindfulness is just being fully awake, fully present, right here, right now. Mindful meditation is a set of techniques that we can use to become more mindful. You see it? So mindfulness is 24/7, 365 as a goal, something to shoot for. It's a stretch goal. We're never probably ever, unless we become, like the kind of person who starts levitating.
The turtle.
Yeah. I can promise you, for me, that's still very much a stretch goal. But mindful meditation is a tool or technique that we can use as a way of becoming more mindful. But as you suggest, when we're meditating mindfully, that's another break glass in case of emergency kind of thing. That can dramatically reduce our level of anxious arousal. Now, a lot of us need to kind of get to a place where we're a little bit private. Like diaphragmatic breathing, you can do in the middle of a meeting. I don't know that I can do mindful meditation really in a meeting, but maybe I can certainly, remind myself to be right here, right now, fully present without judgment, and just to be, experiencing what I'm experiencing, and that's okay.
Well,
accept it.
This is interesting. I literally just had a conversation with a good friend of mine. He's really into this sort of space, and actually, just to layer it on thick here and exaggerate the scene here, this conversation also took place inside a sauna, which I'll probably get to in a couple of minutes. But he talked about like a meditation practice. And he was unpacking like, what does that actually mean? And he says, well, think about what the words mean. It's a practice. It is like practicing piano. You're doing this thing, you're training. It's not necessarily super fun, but it allows you to go and perform this incredible symphony in another part of your life whenever you're at the bar trying to like pick people up, or you're trying to impress people, or you're at a concert or whatever. And he's like, it's the same with meditation practice. Like you do this thing, it's kind of uncomfortable. You do it anyway so that you can take it out into the rest of your day and experience more of that mindfulness that you're talking about. You can get more of your 24 hours in a state of mindfulness by going to the meditation gym and kind of like lifting those weights. And it could be in the form of just sitting for 5 minutes with a phone timer. I think people get all in their heads like, oh, it has to be this super fancy, like mystical, spiritual experience. Like very often it's just, I'm waiting for the bus and I do it, or I park my car and I set like a 5-minute timer on my phone at the end of the night. And before I go in and see my wife and my daughter, it's like, boom, there's 5 minutes just to reset me and kind of close the stress loop for the day.
Beautiful. Yeah. And the key there to make it mindful. So let's see if we can, like you said, layer it and stack it with diaphragmatic breathing. So I'm sitting, let's just say, in a comfortable chair in my house, and I set the 5-minute timer. I literally, do this not infrequently, and I'll set the timer and I close my eyes and I get very comfortable. As I'm focused on very deep diaphragmatic inhalations, I'm going to try to get all of my attentional focus just on the breathing. And every time my mind wanders, that sort of monkey mind, like it just wants to start thinking about, well, what am I going to do next? And what about like all the things on my to-do list and all the things tomorrow and all the things yesterday? Every time I notice my attention wandering, I notice it, I accept it, and I redirect back to the breath. And that's a beautiful thing, that permission to just be like, yeah, my mind's going to wander. And the game is to catch it. Not to judge it, just to catch it, and then to redirect the attention back to the moment. What is my task here? Diaphragmatic breathing. Now, to make it, because I'm very, I love games. I think games are really absorbing, and I have just enough attentional deficit that I need something more compelling to keep my attention. So I make it a game. Like, okay, I'm going to just do a slow count, 1, 2, 3 on every inhale and on every exhale. And I'm going to then keep a meta count of how many of these deep breaths have I had while I'm breathing diaphragmatically, and how deeply can I get into this relaxed state so that like I can do a 10 count on the inhale, 10 count on the exhale. And I can literally sometimes, if I'm in a zone, go 5 minutes with fewer than 25 total breaths because they're so deep and so slow.
Dude, whatever gets it done, go ahead.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. And that's, you might just be like, okay, Steve is a freak. He's weird, whatever. But I'm just saying, for me, that helps facilitate the mindfulness, which is what? Just being fully in the moment and not allowing your mind to get caught up in rumination. So every time it starts to drift, just bring it back. So you're fully focused just on that one thing, the breathing or the sitting or the whatever. That's it. That's all. That's the whole ball game it's like learning to play chess, right? It takes 3 minutes to learn the moves and a lifetime.
Very good. Very good. This is a quick plug. There's no financial incentive here. I know they sponsor a lot of podcasts, but this is just as a user of their service. And I think it's a great service. Headspace actually has a great 30-day crash course into meditation. It's guided meditation.
Love it.
You can actually get it if you're a student. You can get it, I think, as part of your Spotify membership. That's how I got it. I got a 30-day free trial. And because this isn't sponsored, I can totally say this. I just used the free trial. It taught me how to meditate. And then I just ended up using an egg timer every time going forward after that. So, there are some amazing resources out there, Headspace being one of them, if you would like an on-ramp into this world. I will also point out here that there are kind of a few hacks. And this is very un-Zen-like of me to say this, but meditation practices are all about training you, like we said, to get to that point where you can experience it in your day-to-day. There are also, in this example, it's one of the few examples where there are a few shortcuts up the mountain. And what I mean by that is I'll not talk about this for too long because I could talk for 3 hours about this, and we will, if I have any say in the matter, do a full series on this. I'm a huge fan of the cold water. Growing up in Ireland, we swim in the sea year round. It's freezing cold. It's painful, but it's incredible. It makes you feel so good. And I think during some of the lockdowns, there were a real kind of widespread awareness that, dude, the cold water is really powerful and there are some really interesting effects that it can have. And there's some early research popping up to kind of back a few anecdotal things up. But my friend says it best. He says, you can't worry about the future whenever you're absolutely submerged in cold water. And I think there's something quite nice about that because it's it eliminates your ability to freak out about whatever it is you're freaking out about because you have to be so in the moment and so focused on the thing that you're actually doing. And interesting, in a lot of the prep I did for today's episode, talking to my friends that are on the anxiety spectrum, and even just reading quotes from big time authors and academics and famous people. Do you know what came up time and time again?
What's that?
Baths and naps. And I was I'm embarrassed to say this in our fancy mental health pod, but I feel compelled to. And I think what's going on here is these are two things that kind of take you out of the frenzy of your day to day. They're little, the reset button on a device or restarting your computer. And there's this quote I love, I have it pinned up in a couple of places. It's by Anne Lamott. But she's got this lovely quote and it says, almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you. And I love that. And I think like this, what we've said in this short term, the break glass in case of emergency, it's unplugging for a few minutes. It doesn't take a long time. Maybe it is going and having a bath or a shower or a nap, or for me, jumping in the nearest sauna, or doing a couple of burpees, or going for a quick run, or going for a quick cycle, or running up the stairs a few times. Something really fast just to break up the cycle, stop you ruminating, get you out of your head, get you into your body, get you focused on something else. It's very hard to worry about your presentation that's coming up or the podcast you're doing that you're nervous about whenever you're like huffing out of breath after doing like 50 burpees or something. Do you know what I mean? So
see, now you start talking about exercise. You're speaking my love language.
I was going to say, this is one of your love languages.
Yeah, no, because look, exercise, it's going to be a mantra for this whole, really the whole pod. But if you could change one habit in your life for the long-term benefit, I would probably nominate getting regular physical activity as a habit. But also, we don't think about this, but just break glass in case of emergency. If you're having a stressful day, a tough day, you do 10 minutes of some high intensity activity, whatever it is, burpees or sprints or, lifting some heavy weights, maybe even lifting to failure, make sure you warm up, make sure you got good form, all that. But it has a powerful impact on the brain's stress circuits and, get this, on our circulating stress hormones. So if you've got a lot of adrenaline coursing through your veins, a lot of cortisol, and you do some intensive physical activity, your body is actually using up those hormones. So your stress load drops. You will literally from the bottom up feel less driven by that motor of anxious arousal. It also, exercise hits your serotonin circuits, which have a soothing, calming effect on the amygdala, on the we haven't talked about the hypothalamus, but it's kind of ground zero for that fight or flight response. Exercise is it is the wonder drug. It will not cure all pathological anxiety, but man, as a tool to be part of your doing all the things toolkit, as part of your polytherapy approach, I think it's indispensable for most of us.
That's so great. I'll just really quickly, I'll kind of layer on top of that. I've been really getting into recently like gardening and doing like physical work around the house. And there's something so therapeutic as someone who uses their brain all day for work and creates value in the digital world. There's something so amazing about going and moving like a pile of stones from one side of the garden to the other.
Oh, man.
Because you just have that like real-time feedback. You see the results as they happen. I've also like been really enjoying just like, like splitting wood. Like,
yeah, love it.
In the back garden, like it's just so nice. And then you have the added effect of like, now I can use this wood to go and like warm my house. Do you know what I mean? Like, I know not everyone has like a fire. Like most people over here do, I think, just because of the climate. But so as much as possible, like you can also just do physical things that also I think have a huge mental benefit as well. So okay,
yeah. Oh wait, one last thing. Going for a walk for like 30-40 minutes. Kind of gives you that, you were talking about like hitting the reset button, turning on it. Going for the walk is like a kind of, it's not like taking a nap, right? But it's like I am stepping outside of my routine, outside of my world. I'm going someplace else. And now I can clear my head. Now, the really important caveat, disclaimer, is you have to make sure while you're walking or doing any other activity that you're not ruminating, that you're not turning those anxious worry thoughts over and over and over in your head. Because if you're worrying while you're walking, you can actually still end up making the anxiety worse.
Sure.
So you need to make sure that your head is reasonably clear, or at least that your mental focus is on something else. If you need to use a podcast, if you need to use some engaging music, I think that's fine. Ideally maybe like a walking partner, so you have conversation.
Ooh,
keep you awake
Yeah. Okay, so exercise kind of it's the beautiful gap that straddles the short term and the long term, because as you said, we really want to be having a regular exercise routine. What are some of the other like longer term strategies and plays that we can start to implement in our life?
Yeah. So I want to start with something else that is a little bit of a hybrid. It's a little bit, believe it or not, another like super effective break glass in case of emergency kind of strategy, but only at night.
Okay.
Okay. And the reasons are going to become obvious in a minute because I'm talking about magnesium. Now, magnesium is, probably as a lot of listeners know, it's a mineral that is found in our diets. We need it. It's critical. It's essential for life. It plays a crucial role in lots of different pathways in the body, different metabolic pathways, but it turns out in lots of brain signaling pathways, magnesium kind of acts like, remember we talked about GABA earlier, and there's another transmitter that GABA works with a lot called glutamate. Anyway, magnesium sits in the middle of the gap between brain cells, and it acts like a traffic control cop or something. It kind of regulates like how active these circuits are going to be. If we have adequate magnesium, then it kind of helps keep us from getting too anxious, from getting too aroused, from the circuits burning too hot. Here's the problem. Because of our crappy, modern 21st century, overprocessed, hyper-processed, fast food-laden diet, 70% of Americans are estimated to have a deficiency, to be suboptimal in their level of magnesium. Also, our soil is often depleted. So because we have all these fancy fertilizers, we can grow food in soil that's lost a lot of its minerals that like 100 years ago, it's like, okay, well, you're not going to use that depleted soil because you can't grow anything in it. Now we can, and we do. And so even if we eat exactly the same sort of food that, that people ate 100 years ago, which would be way better for us, we still might wind up magnesium deficient because we're just getting food grown in depleted soil. So anyway, long story short, lots of us don't have enough magnesium from our diet. We can get more by eating a lot more green leafy.
Shout out to my kale spinach lovers out there.
Dude, your kale lovers, your spinach, your arugula, your romaine lettuce, not so much iceberg lettuce, but most of your green leafies and also, other green vegetables like broccoli and so forth.
I'm just hijacking here. Throw your spinach and your kale in a pan before you make an omelette, and you can eat a crazy amount of it because it shrinks down. You don't even realize you're eating it. It's the easiest spinach hack I've ever found in my life.
I love that hack. It's crazy. You can have this massive container of spinach. And by the time
it's actually uncomfortable. You're like, wait a second, did I eat like that much spinach?
It's unbelievable. So anyway, that's the approach that I love, but supplements have their place. Now, generally speaking, supplements are way better for short-term use than long-term use. Long-term, ideally, we want to get these things from our diet. But if you're deficient, then you may not want to wait for 6 months of a better diet to kick in, right? You may want to use a magnesium supplement. There are lots of them out there. Again, we're not giving medical advice, but the magnesium, there are lots of chemical forms of magnesium. The one that seems to hit the brain the hardest is called magnesium threonate, and we'll put that in the show notes. THREONATE, magnesium threonate. You can find it at a health food store. You can find it online. And somewhere between 100 and 500 milligrams have been found in lots of carefully controlled research to have anti-anxiety effects in the short term, but also sleep inducing effects. So a lot of people have found if they take a bit of magnesium, a half hour before bedtime or so, it helps them fall asleep, maybe helps them stay asleep for a time. It's a muscle relaxant as well. Really super useful for those of us who may be deficient because we just don't have a great diet, or we just don't eat a lot of green leafies, or maybe we just have an malabsorption syndrome where the gut has been damaged by lots of antibiotics or other, things that can damage the lining of the small intestine. So we're not absorbing the minerals the way we're supposed to, even if we're actually getting them. Magnesium, really powerful tool to have around. Talk to your doctor first, but keep it in mind. Now, anything else with that, or can we move on?
So this sounds like the perfect segue into, I was thinking about her as you were talking about getting your nutrition from foods rather than supplements. The main woman, Felice Jacka. I read her book, Brain Changer. That's what it's called, isn't it?
Yeah.
And she talks a lot about the bacteria in your gut. So you just talked about like an antibiotic and how it can kind of damage some of those things.
Yes.
Talk to me about probiotics and prebiotics, because it is my current obsession. It's my current rabbit hole that I'm living out my life in.
Okay, a promise to Hugh and the listener. We have to take a deep dive in an episode very soon on the gut-brain microbe axis, on the fact that there are all of these microbes that live in our bodies. And when I say a lot, trillions with a T. How about this? We're outnumbered in our own body. There are more microbes in our bodies than there are human cells. And the scary and also delightful thing is they know how to hack into our brains, and they're good at it. Our level of anxious arousal is determined from the bottom up, in part by what's happening in our nervous system. And again, our beneficial microbes know how to hack right into the peripheral nervous system that connects the gut to the brain, and they turn down our level of adrenaline. They turn down our level of our heart rate, our breathing, and they then tunnel all the way into the brain. It's almost, think of like a hacker on a remote terminal that they could, like, they're not standing in the mainframe, but they can hack into the mainframe, right? Remotely. That's what these microbes are doing. The beneficial ones, again, they're trying to make us less stressed out. And the bad actors, they don't give a damn. They are just doing their thing. And part of their thing is they are hacking our brains, and they're making us way more stressed out, way more inflamed, way more foggy, way more depressed. They don't care because they're not in it for the long run. They didn't co-evolve with us, at least not at high levels. They're opportunists. They're parasites. And yet, for so many people, they are now the predominant species in the gut. So what do we have to do? Well, we've got to get our house in order microbially. And what does that mean? We need to restore our friends. We need to kick out the free riders and the loafers that are making us so miserable. How do we do it? Prebiotics and probiotics. Probiotics is basically, just a fancy way of saying, well, we can take a supplement that repopulates the gut with our friends. I can't sit here with a straight face and say, oh, absolutely, like, get this probiotic supplement and it's going to make you less anxious. But what I can say is there are a few types of bacteria, and we'll put them in the show notes, that seem to have an anti-anxiety effect in animal models and at least in some human studies. I recently actually published a paper on this whole topic of probiotics and anxiety. And there's a lot of promising early work there, but we just don't know enough. What we do know is that fermented foods, so anything fermented, I know you're a fan. I know.
Come on, baby.
Yeah, I know. So obviously things like sauerkraut, and kimchi, and kombucha, right? But any fermented food is likely to have beneficial bacteria that can immediately take residence in our gut and can, almost like you're planting a garden. These are not the annuals. A lot of probiotics are like the annuals. It's like you got to keep replanting. You got to take that thing every day. If you get it from fermented foods, it's like your perennials. Like you plant it and now it can take root and it's, now you're set. And so fermented foods, I think, are absolutely the go-to food products for people that are really up on the science for this.
Let me just sell it really, really quick to you guys. Like, it is so fun to ferment your own food. Like, it is like having a garden inside your kitchen. Like, I wake up every morning and I go and I was like, okay, I check on my sauerkraut. How's sauerkraut doing? I check the pickles. I check the kefir, which is a form of fermented milk, which sounds disgusting, but it's absolutely gorgeous. And it is incredibly fun. Like, I've learned so many things about even like how my great grandmother would have prepared food and how she would have preserved vegetables like when they weren't in season. And it is just incredibly fun, incredibly tasty, lots of room for experimentation. I recently just quote unquote harvested like a 4-week ferment of sauerkraut, but it's like red cabbage, white cabbage, jalapenos, garlic, carrot,
dude.
and ginger all in the one pot. And it is one of the craziest things I've ever tasted in my life. And it tastes so much better because I fermented it. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
So
yeah, that's amazing.
I have a question that's probably closer to home for you. And
yeah.
it's very sensitive. And it's maybe like so sensitive that it could be what's in your hand right now. When I take too much coffee... I get...
Are you busting my chops?
Yeah. 1.6 liters? Is that what it was? I can't remember off the top of my head. 1.3 liters?
I think it might have been like 1.6 now.
Oh, crazy. Yeah. Anyway, I get real jittery. And when you were describing in part one about some of the physical kind of symptoms of anxiety, I was like, dude, I feel like I have caffeine-induced anxiety, and that's why I don't do caffeine. So for some people, not you, Stephen, of course, you would never, ever have to consider doing something like this. But could some people experiment with removing something like caffeine from their diet?
Absolutely, yeah. And this, I'm so glad you raised this, really. A, because, I love the opportunity to be embarrassed by our audience. But B, because it's such a brilliant illustration of the point we keep coming back to, which is there is no one-size-fits-all approach. The effect of any given drug or psychoactive agent on the brain is going to vary dramatically from one person to the next. And with stimulants like caffeine, we see it in living technicolor. Why? Because some of us, and I'm in this category, if I take a stimulant, I feel less anxious. I feel, and by the way, we typically tend to see that with people who are on the ADHD spectrum, not exclusively, but if you, like me, have a reaction to caffeine where it actually makes you feel a kind of calm alertness. A lot of people, by the way, get that experience with nicotine, which is one of the many, many, many things that can make it so addictive. But absolutely, most people's response to caffeine is going to be to feel very jittery, edgy, and sort of driven by a motor in a very unpleasant way. So if you get that experience to caffeine, then by all means, you want to cut it down. That would also go for nicotine. That would also go for any other stimulant. There are millions of people out there that have been prescribed high-dose stimulants for a disorder like ADHD or a disorder like narcolepsy. And, those are really useful. But again, if they're making you feel super jittery and anxious, there's probably an adjustment needed. So you want to talk that over with your prescriber.
It's that time of the show, Steve.
Oh, it's time.
Every single episode, we have to do it. Keeps popping up. I feel like there's no way. Like in every single show note we've done, I've had to include this next point because it always pops its head up.
It's that time, ladies and gentlemen. Make sure you have your shot glass at the ready.
Your thimble.
Your thimble. If you're doing the mental health drinking game, it's time to take that swig of your omega-3.
Ding, 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 ding.
It's time.
It's omega-3. It's omega-3. We need to get a jingle. That's going to be the stopgap.
I can tell after 3.5 hours of recording today, he's writing jingles now, which is, I don't know whether to be alarmed, amused. It's maybe some combination.
It's my tell. Call my wife. I'm in trouble.
Once you start beatboxing, man,
we're
just turning off the microphone.
That's true.
I'm just saying right now. Yeah, omega-3. So do you want to talk about omega-3s and anxiety, or do you want me to?
Oh, can I give it a go? Because I feel like we've talked about it enough.
Yeah.
So
go.
Let's do it this way. Maybe I'll say some things and you can be like, yeah, that's relevant, or yeah, that's not relevant. Overall, the big push that we always talk about with omega-3 is that it is a fatty acid that your brain cannot produce. Your brain is made up of predominantly fat once you take all the water out of it. And these are things that we can only get from our diet. That's why they're called essential fatty acids. Our bodies can't make them. We need to get them from things that we put in our mouth, whether that be high quality, sustainable fish. So it's the fish that especially has been caught in the wild. Salmon is a good example. A great life hack that Steve's put me on to is if you can get your hands on some high quality sardines or mackerel in a can, it can be, or as we say over here, in a tin. It can actually be a really cost-effective way to do it as opposed to the really expensive salmon that you find around. There are some plant sources. If you are vegan, algae, or do you guys say algae?
Algae, yeah. We have a soft G on it. Algae.
Nice. So that's also a really useful supplement to look into, unless, I don't know, can you get actual algae at your supermarket and eat it? I doubt it.
I've never seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen lots,
I mean, who knows?
lots
Maybe
of algae.
in some sort of like farm shop or like permaculture environment, you can get your hands on it. But
Absolutely.
the thing for me, anyway, coming from a depression angle, is it reduces inflammation, which is a big part of the game. And it just activates, this is where you need to take over, parts of your brain that just keep you overall healthy and flourishing. So please land this omega-3 plane by tying this to anxiety for us.
Yeah, so there's pretty good evidence now that, as Hugh said, omega-3s reduce inflammation. And you may remember from earlier episodes, inflammation is just a part of the immune response that is largely designed to help us like repair tissue damage and fend off invading pathogens. When the brain gets inflamed, it tends to ramp up its stress response.
Inflame on the membrane. Sorry.
Inflame on the, oh God.
Call help, please. Inflame on the brain.
What you talking about, SA? All right, where were we? Oh yeah. So you do not want your neural membranes inflamed. The inflamed brain is very unhappy and tends to go into fight or flight mode. So anything that can reduce neural inflammation is generally going to make us feel less anxious. Omega-3s can fit the bill. They also have, for some of us, an effect of enhancing the signaling strength of serotonin. So serotonin, we kind of get more bang for the buck with every firing of a neuron that uses serotonin. So we've seen how serotonin circuits help regulate activity in the amygdala, activity in the cingulate cortex, activity even in the hypothalamus that is the immediate trigger for the fight or flight reflex. So omega-3s can be super helpful for anxiety. For some people, as a long-term play, their effects are not immediate. It's not like magnesium, where you take magnesium and within 30 minutes you feel relaxed. Omega-3s is more like an antidepressant, where you take it for a couple weeks, usually a couple weeks before you'd feel the impact. And again, disclaimer, occasionally somebody will take omega-3s and all the kind of side effects that you can see with an antidepressant, they're theoretically possible. The best evidence I've seen, and also clinical evidence, is they're way less common, but not impossible. So be on the lookout for a little bit of emotional numbing, a little bit of reduced give a damn level, reduced error detection, reduced perfectionism. Now, when that happened to me, when I started supplementing with omega-3s, it was all good.
You're like, it just took the edge off me.
Oh, it was so yeah. And my wife, again, because of the blunted insight, I didn't even, it's hard to notice subtle changes in your own mental state, but my wife noticed that I seemed to be a calmer driver in traffic because I tend to,
that is so awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, that was pretty cool.
Well, I'm really proud of us because like so far in the long term here, these are all like diet related stuff when you really think about it.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
So look, come on, what are we? Are we a nutrition podcast or are we a mental health podcast? Get out of here.
Okay,
I need give me some psychological
hardcore.
Yeah, hardcore like psychology stuff.
Let's go back to ancestral psychology. And what I mean by that is like 100 years ago.
All right.
Psychology is it always cracks me up when my colleagues, when people ask like, well, how come psychology hasn't made as much progress as physics? And they're like, well, it's a very young science. And I'm like, dude, it's 150 years old.
That's so funny.
We've been at this for a while. But one of the things that's been known for many, 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 many decades is a very basic principle that literally every one of us should commit to memory and leverage in our day-to-day life. Here we go. When it comes to something that makes us afraid, something that makes us anxious, exposure will generally make it better and avoidance will generally make it worse. So in other words, if we avoid the thing that makes us uncomfortable, the brain registers that as, oh, the thing made me uncomfortable. I predicted that if I stayed in its presence, something bad would happen. I escaped and nothing bad happened. Therefore, I'm gonna be even more afraid next time. Why? Because that strategy worked. Getting afraid worked because nothing bad happened. On the other hand, if we force ourselves to face the things that make us uncomfortable, and nothing bad happens, which it generally will not with controlled exposure, then we habituate. We habituate, which is a fancy way of saying the brain is just like, yeah, okay, I thought bad things were going to happen, but they didn't. So I guess I'm not going to be as anxious next time. This is a therapy super tool. This is literally a principle that's at the core of every effective psychotherapy for every effective form of anxiety. It doesn't mean that it's the whole ball game. It's not a magic bullet typically. I will say for some types of phobia, it really is the ball game. So like if you have a snake phobia, just exposure and habituation to the snake probably will be curative if you do it under the correct kind of supervision.
Yeah, just be careful because if your phobia is bats, you may actually launch a vigilante career.
Right, or contract the next coronavirus. We really don't want to go there, but yeah. So obviously, be a little judicious about how. Oh, the other caveat I got to put on this, Hugh. So, all right, here we go. This is the Ilardi rule of anxiety.
Ooh.
Exposure always makes it better. Asterisk. Put the asterisk on always.
Okay.
Exposure asterisk always makes it better. Avoidance always makes it worse. The asterisk is you do not want the exposure to be traumatic or painful. Right? Because that's the age-old strategy of like, oh, the kid is afraid of the water. Let's throw him or her into the deep end of the pool.
Yeah.
That's, ironically, that's a therapeutic technique we call, I swear to God, you can't make this up. We call it flooding. Flooding. And flooding, yeah, it sometimes works, right? Sometimes the kid is thrown in the deep end and yeah, they're traumatized, but like they start swimming and it's like, no harm, no foul, maybe. But generally speaking, we want to do it gradually. We want to do it in a very controlled way, in a kinder, gentler, non-traumatic, non-painful way. Non-traumatic exposure makes it better. So anything in our lives. Oh, by the way, you people who procrastinate out there, why do we procrastinate? It's experiential avoidance. We feel anxious when we approach the thing that we got to do. So we put it off. The more we put it off, the more anxious it makes us the next time we approach it, and we get locked in a doom loop, right? So even there, the ability to tolerate discomfort, experiential exposure makes it better. It's a life hack. It's really powerful.
That's great. I can just picture in my head there was of like a small little ruler, and we used to flick rubbers at our teachers. I'm sure you guys would never do something.
Wait.
I need to translate. Oh, I do. Sorry.
Rubber.
We used to flick erasers at our teachers.
Yeah.
I mean, well, it depends what school you go to, I guess. We're savages over here. This idea of like a ruler, like it can bend pretty far, but at some point it'll break. And you don't want to snap yourself here because then that's trauma. But you can slowly start to move your way out there. Okay, final one, mate. And it's my favorite one because it's just so left field. I never heard anyone talk about this until I was exposed to your work. So I'll let you do the big reveal here. What is the last long-term strategy for treating anxiety? It's totally left field.
Yeah, so, quantum physicists have discovered the duality, the light wave duality, the fact that light exists both as particles and waves. Now, I find this really interesting because in part, when these little packets of light hit specialized receptors in the back of the eye, in the so-called retina of the eye, they're like little packets of drug that are hitting the eye. We're getting they're invisible, sort of. They hit these specialized receptors and they have this massive superhighway connection to the center of the brain, really powerful body clock regulatory circuits called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It's part of the hypothalamus or adjacent to the hypothalamus in the brain. And light is literally a drug that influences brain signaling, brain chemistry in literally dozens of different ways that we've now discovered. It influences our body clock, it influences our hormone, our arousal, our, get this, functioning in our serotonin circuits. There's that damn brain chemical serotonin again. Get this. During the winter, when people have less bright light exposure. So when we're outside, it is literally 100 times, on average, roughly 100 times brighter than indoor lighting. So if you're in a quote unquote well-lit indoor room, it's about 200 lux, L-U-X. If you walk outside on a sunny day, it'll be like 20,000 lux. On a really sunny day, it could be 100,000 lux at midday. So like many, many orders of magnitude brighter. So you're getting just a much bigger dose of this drug that we call light. And in the winter, when people are getting a whole lot less sunlight, A, because the days are shorter, B, because the days are colder, so people are outside less, C, because usually in a lot of northern hemisphere climates, it's cloudier. Even, if the sun were to be out, it's not out because it's cloudy. All right. So we get a lot less sunlight in the winter. If you do a brain scan and you do a functional MRI you train it on serotonin receptors in the brain, what you find is those serotonin receptors have adjusted their density in such a way that says, oh, we have a lot less serotonin-based activity in the brain in the winter. It is freaky. Serotonin circuits get less active in the winter because our brains are getting less of the drug of bright sunlight. And there's a whole thing we can do on winter depression and winter anxiety and all that. But the take-home point for today is light is a drug. And if we drug our retina with lots of bright light, either by getting out in sunlight or using a therapeutic light box, it can make us less anxious. Why? Because of these downstream effects on serotonin. And so now, caveat, disclaimer, some people, when they start using a therapeutic light box, it makes them a little jittery. Why? Because light also has activating effects. It's a drug that both makes us more energized and alert. So it doesn't just hit serotonin, it also hits dopamine, which is more energizing, like a stimulant. So light is a stimulant and a soothing agent. And depending on how your brain is wired, it can go either way. For most people, it will initially make you more energized. And if you can get through the initial jitteriness, it will make you more calm as well.
Awesome. And I can confirm that we are going to do a full episode all about light and light therapy, where we will allow Steve to do the full deep dive. He's been under strict orders today. It's like, no, I know you want to, but just treat it as a teaser, okay? Because it's a useful jumping off point for people. And I like to play this game now every day where I try to sneak as much sun in as possible, whether it's like even taking the laptop outside to do my emails or, walking to a specific part in the park with my daughter where I know that there's a gap in the tree that I can get like a little bit because it's just so powerful. And you were the one that turned me on to all that, but I've noticed the difference in my life, even in the afternoons sometimes whenever I'm heading towards a bit of a slump. It's like, whoa, it's as if like nature designed us to like be outside in this light. Oh. It's so strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
So and, hey, on that point, we haven't really talked about the tribe today. We've kind of let our hunter gatherer people like just slip away. I think they only got one mention. We didn't talk about evolution at all, which is surprising as well. So I would love to know, like, to kind of put a pin in all this and start to land the plane.
Yeah.
One of the questions that we're trying to explore in this 101 series is, what are some of the superpowers of each of these mental disorders or the personality types that are usually connected with them? So I got to ask you, is there any superpower to the anxious individual, or what specific role can they play in the tribe for us today? What's the gift that they give us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the gift is, if you're in any group, you've always got that one person, not always, but usually you got that one person who is really, really good at kind of thinking like, what could possibly go wrong, right? And usually the leader of a group is somebody who's very confident and low anxiety and they're just like, oh yeah, this will totally work, and then because of their confidence and their persuasiveness, a lot of other people in the group are kind of on the bandwagon. They're like, yeah, okay, yeah, let's do it.
Elect them into power.
Yeah, don't get me started. but yeah, what could possibly go wrong? We'll be greeted as liberators, right?
You couldn't resist. You just
I couldn't. I'm
just
sorry.
slipped it in.
I mean, you can insert your own warlike context there. There may be contemporary ones as well as historic ones that would fit. We'll be greeted as liberators. What could possibly go wrong? Well, the people on the team, the people in the tribe, the people in the group who are more anxious, their brains are exquisitely gifted at gaming out not only worst case scenarios, but even other more plausible, maybe even sometimes likely scenarios of appraising like, hey, here's a more realistic assessment of our odds of these various outcomes. And maybe we need to be more cautious. Maybe we need to be more vigilant. So you give the example of Bradley Cooper, just being all carefree and insouciant in the middle of, some really high crime neighborhood. Like, what could possibly go wrong? Well, hey, guess what? Like, there are actual dangers that you might want to take your headphones out and be a little bit more situationally aware for, right? Well, we need people like that in the tribe that are more situationally aware that can help us stay calibrated. By the way, the nature of the game with anxiety is not should you be anxious or not. It's should you be anxious right now? Are you in an objectively threat-riddled, dangerous context where some anxiety is called for? Because in that situation, it is dangerous and pathological not to be anxious, right?
Yeah.
So over the course of evolutionary history, people have generally been pushed in the direction of more anxiety when their world was more dangerous, pushed in the direction of lower anxiety when things were at a low risk sort of ebb. Now, here's we always have to have this little shout out to the mismatch between our ancestral brains and the modern world. So get this. In the ancient world, if you ever heard bad news about anything dangerous or bad that happened to anybody in your social world, in the extended tribe of other clans that all speak the same language and intermarry, yada, yada. If anybody got eaten by anything, right, it's like, oh my God, there are leopards on the prowl now, right? Like, you need to be more anxious because Grok just had his baby eaten, right? Like, so now everybody's more anxious because they got bad news. So think about this. In the ancient world that shaped our brains, any bad news of anything tragic or horrible or dangerous that happened to anyone literally objectively made you more anxious because you needed to be more anxious because your world was now more dangerous. But in the modern global village, social media, smartphone-laden village of 7.5 billion, there's always dangerous, horrible happening to somebody 24/7, 365. Actually, every second, right? And if we live online, if we watch the news a lot, if we monitor social media a lot, then we are going to have a perception of our world that is much, much more dangerous than the objective reality. The objective reality is most of us inhabit, and I know this sounds kind of obscene to say this in the middle of a pandemic, when there's a land war happening in Europe for the first time in over 70 years. But for most people, the modern world is objectively far safer than the ancestral world. And yet, if you look at the stress hormone levels of modern day Aboriginal groups, they are orders of magnitude lower, even though their world is more dangerous. They are way better calibrated to the world. And by the way, their anxiety peaks whenever the danger emerges, and then it goes back all the way back down to baseline. And for us, the modern world is perversely calibrated to keep us anxiously aroused all the time if we will let it. So how's that for a full circle pivot all the way back to something psychological and to one of our favorite topics, which is, we're not really well designed for the modern world. We need to be very smart about how we interact with it.
I honestly, I kid you not, I don't even want to do the intro because I just want the music to play right now and fade you out because I feel like that was just an absolutely gorgeous place to end. But look, I feel like we would be doing the listener a disservice because it wouldn't give us a chance to say thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Yeah.
Whether you just jumped into today's episode or you listened to the full thing, we really, really appreciate you spending this time with us. And we sincerely, like from the bottom of our hearts, like really hope that it has been beneficial for you and to you. Like our heart for these episodes, yes, of course, in the whole kind of podcast, but particularly in this series, is that they're just really useful tools or jumping off points to help you if you are dealing with this specific mental disorder, you know, anxiety today or addiction or depression or any of the other episodes that we do in the series. But also if you have people in your life that you love and that you care about, we just hope that this could be a really useful resource for you to develop a bit of empathy for that person, to develop a bit of an understanding to even what's happening in the brain or what's happening on the physical level. Never mind some of the tactics and the tools and the strategies that you can use to maybe get alongside the person in your life with the specific disorder. And you can become a real source of support, not just emotionally, not just to listen, but also a really practical person that can lay out a couple of breadcrumbs and a couple of steps that can really make a big difference in people's lives.
Absolutely. That's so well put. I have absolutely nothing to add.
Awesome. So some final housekeeping before we leave you today. We are a crowdfunded show. This whole production that you heard today, the whole Anxiety 101 saga, was made possible by people just like you who pledge as little as the price of a cup of hipster coffee or maybe a little pint or bottle of hipster beer, craft brewed. You know, I know it's a big thing at the minute. Yeah, and look, I always say on podcasts, like, if you don't have the means to support us, hey, absolutely no problem at all. We will continue to make this show for you. It will continue to be free. If you do have the means and you have the desire to do so, it's your generosity that allows this to stay free for everyone else. You'll notice there was no ads today. There was no 8-minute intro where we're promoting some sort of service that you've heard on a million different podcasts. And we believe it's important. We believe in editorial integrity. We don't want to be, promoting drugs from big pharma. We don't want to be having our hands tied in any sort of way with sponsorships because we really care about this. We put our hearts into it. It's a source of incredible passion and purpose for me and Steve. I know I can speak on behalf of him in this case. And Absolutely. We're just delighted to be on this journey with you. We're starting to get into our stride here. We've got lots of episodes out there. It's amazing to be able to refer back to content in the library and in the archive already. And we really look forward to building this thing up and seeing where it takes us. So if you want to do that, patreon.com/mental health podcast is where you can do so. Also really want to plug our website, mentalhealth.fm. Why do I want to plug a website? The main reason is because we have an upcoming Q&A episode right around the corner. We're just finalizing the questions that we're going to use that have been sent in from people all over the world. So you have a couple of weeks left to get your questions in. We would love it, particularly in voice form. There's a fancy little widget on the contact page of our website where you can literally click it on your smartphone or on your laptop. And you can have, I think it's up to 90 seconds to share a question with us that Steve and I would love to tackle. So yeah, you'll also get show notes for all the things we talked about in today's episode. And it's also just a place where you can drop us a message, say hi, tell us where you're listening in from and what you've enjoyed about the podcast so far. And of course, any feedback you can give us, any ways we can make the show better. We're all ears. And other than that, Steve, it's been a blast. Thanks so much. Really appreciate you.
Hey, my friend, it's always an honor. It's always a pleasure. I'm so psyched about this thing. I'm kind of tired. I'm not going to lie. We've been at this 4 hours today, and I'm kind of psyched. So thanks again for another great ride.
Dude, that's how you know you're on to something amazing.